you're in pure sicko mode now. You watch everything Ed Wood has done, and you're wondering, is there more? I see his name attached to some things. Is it true or is it not? Will Sloan is about to prove without a doubt if he directed, wrote, or acted in any of these movies.
That's not true. I can't. And this is one of the enticing things about the world of Ed Wood. There always seem to be new lost Ed Wood movies being discovered, new pseudonymous credits being reattributed to him. It seems to be a bottomless well, and there are many of them that are basically unverifiable at this point. He's not here, the filmmakers aren't here. We have to sort of forensically look at them and see, did Ed direct or write or do anything with this?
So let's start right at the beginning, The Baron of Arizona. What is this, Will?
This is a 1950 film by none other than Samuel Fuller. And so Ed Wood did not write this one,
No.
Did not direct it. So what is his connection? Well, according to the book Nightmare of Ecstasy, and according to the testimony of Kathy Wood, he claims that he was a stunt double. He fell out of the back of a wagon or something dressed as a woman. And God bless Joe Blevins, who runs the Ed Wood Wednesdays blog. He forensically looked at the scene in question, looked at the photographs of the stuntman dressed as the woman, and concluded, maybe it's Ed.
Yeah, there's no way to prove it.
Yeah.
And if he did it or he did not do it, does it really make a difference in his career?
We're going to get back to that question.
Oh, okay.
Because that is an interesting question that fuels a lot of Ed Wood scholarship. Does it matter if he directed it?
Like, I can understand something that he directed, and you're like, I can see those Ed Wood themes there, but a lot of what we're going to talk about is like, yeah, it's like a porno. Like, what difference does it make if Ed Wood wrote or directed in it?
Well, we'll see.
All right, so let's move on to, you put both of these together, Wetbacks? Oh, I feel dirty saying that.
Revenge of the Virgins. So these are 2 of 3 movies credited to one Pete LaRoche as a writer. The other one is called Outlaw Woman. And did Ed write these? Well, Pete LaRoche only wrote these movies. They're all Westerns. And some years later, Pete LaRoche started writing for magazines again. He wrote a life story of William S. Hart in some Western magazine around the time that Ed Wood was writing for similar magazines. Ed Wood was doing a lot of ghostwriting, apparently, for a lot of small-time producers. Did Ed write these movies? I mean, Revenge of the Virgins, the narration definitely kind of sounds like him. Kenny Duncan from Night of the Ghouls does the narration.
Wait, Pete LaRoche also wrote Outlaw Women? Isn't that a Ron Orman production?
Well, we had to consult with the Gold Ninja Video research team. Shame on me. It's Outlaw Queen that Pete LaRoche wrote.
Because if it had been Outlaw Women, it's like, yes, Ed Wood did have contact with Ron Ormond, so that would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, they knew each other. They worked together.
Okay, so you think that these movies, they have that, like, Ed Woodian touch there.
I think he wrote them. I'm going to say yes. I'm banging the gavel on, yes, Ed Wood wrote Revenge of the Virgins.
Now, did Ed Wood write Anatomy of a Psycho?
This is an even more interesting question. Anatomy of a Psycho was directed by Boris Petrov, who also directed Shotgun Wedding, based on a script by Ed Wood. He directed The Unearthly, which features Tor Johnson as Lobo, the character from Night of the Ghouls and Bride of the Monster. And when you look at Anatomy of a Psycho, well, the credited writer only wrote this and maybe one other thing. And it has dialogue in it that many Woodologists have identified as that sounds like Ed Wood. Like when the guy says, "He got me sore," that's an expression that comes up in a lot of Ed Wood movies. There are characters named after members of the Ed Wood entourage. There's a character named Duke, a character named Marco. I feel comfortable saying this is Ed.
Now, where did the attribution to Ed Wood come from for Anatomy of a Psycho?
I believe that came from the author of Muddled Mind, the one of the books about Ed Wood.
And why would Ed have taken like a pseudonym on this? Other than maybe he's working too much, but it doesn't feel like he was during this period.
I mean, he did write a lot of scripts at this time. I'm not sure why he would take a pseudonym, actually.
Now, a famous one is The Love Feast.
The Love Feast is an interesting example. The Love Feast is probably one of the most difficult movies to watch of all time. Not for me. I love it. But for normal...
I had to pull you away from watching it before we did this video.
For normal people who are not severely damaged, The Love Feast is an endurance test. Ed Wood stars in it. He plays Mr. Murphy, a photographer, a lecherous photographer who likes to put ads to hire models for nude modeling and seduce the models. Well, one day, A few too many nude models come to his place. His bed becomes a big orgy of flesh.
A feast, if you will.
But it's too much of a feast for Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy's like in his 50s. He's alcoholic. You get to see Ed.
He's Ed Wood.
You get to see Ed unsimulatedly getting drunker and drunker as the film goes on. You also get to see Ed in his big, billowy, tighty whities. It's a very difficult experience. And at the end, the women turn the tables on Mr. Murphy. They put him in a dog collar and a pink negligee and make him lick their boots. And at one point, Mr. Murphy says, "Oh, I know all about bootlicking. I was in the service." Now, this all sounds like it was written by Ed. The real questionable attribution, though, is when this movie was released on VHS and DVD by Rhino, Joseph F. Robertson, the actual director of the film, gave them a print that said, "Written and directed by Edward D. Wood Jr." And he did that to cash in on, all the frenzy surrounding the Tim Burton biopic.
So it's confirmed that Ed Wood did not direct it. It's this other guy, but he made it look like Ed Wood directed because the movie, he didn't like it. And he knew he would make more money off it if he slapped it on.
Exactly. If he said Ed Wood directed it. Joseph F. Robertson was an old army buddy of Ed Wood's, a very successful exploitation and pornographic film director. He made Auntie Lee's Meat Pies with Karen Black, I believe was one of his, The Crawling Hand, as well as many pornos.
And it should be noted, considering this is basically in the porn realm, it was shot in a day. Like, directing is a very loose...
I mean, I'm comfortable putting it in the Ed Wood canon in the sense that, I'm sure he was creatively involved. The dialogue sounds like Ed. He probably,
it was improvised.
Yeah, he probably wrote a lot of it, and he's in it.
Yeah.
And it definitely feels like a product of him.
All right, so The Only House in Town. This one I see given to Ed Wood all the time.
And I think he did direct this one, but it's a bit of a complicated case because this movie is very clearly unfinished. It was released unfinished. It looks like they shot it in a day. Rudolph Gray, the biographer, says that Ed Wood started shooting it and was replaced by the cinematographer Saul Resnick. Now, I don't know when he would have been replaced because it looks like there's hardly any...
Yeah, it was the day of shooting. Ed Wood fell asleep at noon. And that's pretty much it.
But I do know that in the opening orgy scene, you hear a voice directing them. That's how unfinished this movie is. And it doesn't sound like Ed, but then when the plot kicks into motion... with Ushi Dugard as this brothel madam who's at this, this house that, spans time basically. And all these little vignettes take place in it. The things she says definitely have the Ed Wood patois. And then later, there were magazine articles written by Ed Wood kind of hyping this movie up as if he didn't direct it. He was like, there's a smash new movie coming to town called The Only House in Town.
Yeah, but that's no indication that he's hyping it up, and, pretending he didn't direct it.
It's got it's got ghosts and bootleggers and ghoulies and creepy crawlies and a haunted house. And you read that and it's like, well, hardly any of that's in this movie because it was unfinished. It all takes place in a house. But The
Only House in Town, some would say.
The Only House in Town, though, is one of my favorite Ed Wood movies because
it's so spare and sparse.
It's his last year at Marion Bad. You just kind of fill in the blanks of this movie. It's the closest one to Night of the Ghouls in its dreamlike quality.
All right, we're in the real trash now, the later years. So basically the films that we're going to mention now is, did Ed Wood direct this? They're interchangeable.
Did anyone direct this?
Yes. Did the camera get put down as have sex in front of it?
So I don't want to dismiss this era entirely though, because there is important stuff like Necromania and The Young Marrieds. I think to me, those are major works. You see his preoccupations, you see his themes, you see him wrestling with the issues in those movies. But these ones that we're going to talk about henceforth, not so much.
No. So, Nymphocycler.
Nymphocycler. So this one is often attributed to Ed Wood. He is in it. He plays the husband of Casey Lorraine at the start of the film, who is also a cross-dresser. It peaks, if you're a woodologist, in the opening scenes with Casey Lorraine is in a hot tub and Ed is dressed in drag and he comes and joins her in the hot tub and is obviously having a really good time. I hope Kathy Wood didn't see this.
And when did it being attributed to Ed as a director come in?
Well, for a long time, this movie was lost. There's a section of Nightmare of Ecstasy where Joseph F. Robertson, the aforementioned director of The Love Feast, says, oh yeah, Ed would get really plastered. Like I remember directing him in one movie where he's in a hot tub with a woman and he was just getting drunker and drunker. So that's the smoking gun. That's the telltale, oh, this is a Joseph F. Robertson picture. But when it was rediscovered in the 2010s, people heard Joseph F. Robertson say that and say, what movie was that? I don't remember that. But it was discovered, and it was credited on various home video releases as Ed Wood's Nymphocycler. Now this gets a little more complicated though, because Casey Lorraine herself was interviewed by Andrew Rausch as well as some others. And she always said, oh yeah, Ed Wood directed Nymphocycler. But she's unreliable too, because she's in Take It Out on Trade, she's in The Love Feast.
So she may not even know what movie she's talking about.
Yeah, she's in several Ed Wood-related movies over the span of a couple of years, and she thinks that she only worked with him for a day.
Really? She's in all these movies,
and she's like,
and she claims she worked with him for one day.
And it's like, oh yeah, they put my footage in, various movies. Now, she may just not, like, who would remember? Who would remember making, like, you made a bunch of movies back then. But it is still an open question to me. Nymphocycler is widely attributed to Ed Wood. I don't necessarily believe it, but also he is in it. He was on set. There are scenes that he's not in though, and that feels like Joseph F. Robertson. All
right, now Panty Girls. People have been, we need to know if Ed Wood directed this.
This is a more recent attribution. It was a fan attribution. I think the attribution first came from the site, The Hunt for Edward D. Wood Jr., a great online resource. Joe Blevins on his blog looked at it, and he thinks Ed Wood directed it, I think. I don't want to speak for him too much.
So wait, this is just decided by someone like hunting it down and going, it feels like Ed Wood directed it. But what are the kind of evidence that he presents?
Well, so it is, a one-day wonder from Los Angeles in the early 1970s, 1972 or so, when Ed Wood was making pornography. Renee Bond is in it. Rick Lutz is in it. They were in all of his movies. They were in a lot of other movies too, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
But that's almost like saying, The Beast of Yucca Flats must be an Ed Wood film because his cast and crew are in it.
Exactly. So there are two other pieces of evidence. The only scene with really extensive dialogue is the first 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh, so the rest is more like a visual poem, not sex or anything like that.
Yeah, this is a hardcore one, by the way. Rick Lutz plays a fashion designer who specializes in women's panties, and the monologue that he delivers in the first 3 minutes really feels like Ed. The patois is the clothes do make the man, but, I don't know, it just sounds, but it's still not quite enough to go on.
Yeah. You want to believe.
And then the other thing is women's underwear as a subject.
That's pretty thin, though.
It is pretty thin. There is a midsection of the film where you see different women try on different women's underwear. It has the alternate title Bloomer Girl, which feels like the sort of slang that a man born in 1926 would say. I'm not fully convinced that this is him. I would like it to be him because I would like to have another Ed Wood movie in the canon. And this gets back to your earlier question, does it matter if it was him?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, if most of it is just sexy.
It's just sex scenes, yeah.
Where do you look at it differently or anything like that? You got that 3-minute monologue.
Yeah.
Who's credited as a is anyone credited?
No one is credited anywhere on the movie.
Okay,
it's a one-day wonder at a time of questionable legality.
More people have thought about that movie than it took to film it. Probably do the post-production.
Yes, all 5 or 6 of us who care have thought very deeply about.
Hey, the people watching this too.
Yeah, I want you all to go watch Panty Girls, also known as Bloomer Girl. It's very easy to find. And see what you think.
Xhamster.com, it's right up there.
See what you think. Let's find the smoking gun together.
All right. We also have what's this? Another porno, Swedish erotica.
So Swedish erotica was a very prolific series of loops. It lasted, 15, 20 years.
So not even a movie at this point.
Yeah.
So loops are, you would go to an adult bookstore.
Yeah,
mostly.
And there'd be a little booth, or there might be a little penny arcade thing.
And you would just watch it, it'd be silent.
Yeah, and it was basically just there'd be a little brief setup, a delivery man comes to the woman's apartment, and then there's sex. And that's all it is. No dialogue, silent. In the 1970s, Ed, in addition to writing pornographic novels, also did a lot of loops for a lot of different companies, including the first, allegedly 20 or so, Swedish erotica. And there are definitely ones in that series of movies that feel like Ed. The first one that has John Holmes in it, you see some props recur from Necromania in it. Like there's a picture on the wall that, like, you know, the eyes can come out and somebody's peeking from behind it. That's from Necromania. So little forensic discoveries like that have made it easier to attribute. There is also a loop.
I just would love it. The person watching these porn loops going, wait a minute. Oh my God, that's from Necromania. Is this an Ed Wood film?
Yeah. There's also a loop that Ed Wood himself is in. He does not engage in any pornographic activity, but it's called The Jailer. It is described in Nightmare and Ecstasy, but it was recently found, like in the last couple of years. And you can look up Ed Wood, the jailer, and you can see him as a Mexican jailer with a sombrero. He leads people into the jail. They go about their business, and then at the end it cuts to Ed Wood, like, doing a jerk-off motion laughing.
Okay.
So, you know...
He's laughing with the person watching it, right? He's doing the same thing.
Just having a good time, yeah.
And so, do most people think this is him? Or,
you know, yeah, he definitely...
As opposed to Ed going like, yeah, you can take my props, I don't need them.
The line gets a little, like, blurry. Like, it's absolutely true that he directed loops. It is very probably true that he directed the first number of Swedish erotica films, which means he also worked with John Holmes, probably the only person to work with both Bela Lugosi and John Holmes, unless I'm forgetting anyone.
Boris Karloff.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're really interested in Ed Wood...
you have to watch it?
I mean, the question of did he do this or did he not do this, like, it just gets blurry about, like, the further you get into it. Like, the first number of them may be him, and then after that, it's very hard to tell. There are some in that first number that have, like, supernatural elements, you know, like a little black magic ritual that immediately...
So that's very Ed.
That feels like Ed. And then, if you're watching these in an afternoon like I have, just going through 3 hours of these...
and then taking a nap, and then waking back up because you were too tired from activities watching them.
You're going, you know, you're a starving man in the desert looking for any cactus, you know, with any drop of water.
You can just put your teeth around the, like, spikes.
Just a little bit of that Ed Wood feel.
All right, so I don't want to talk about too much of this because many people have, but, like, the Ed Wood as a writer is such a vast world that feels only, like, lightly tapped.
Oh man, I mean, there are so many books. He wrote I think over 120 documented novels and as well as nonfiction books. The nonfiction books were largely, it'd be like a study in sex and censorship in cinema, which would be, I mean, if you've ever read any of those...
Lots of photos.
Yeah, a lot of photos. If you've ever read any of them, they're so funny because they're, like, not researched at all. And it's him talking about the history of censorship based on kind of what he remembers. So it's like, yes, and then there was the old Fatty Arbuckle scandal, and that led to a panic, and, you know, just the things that everybody already knows.
Yeah, because he would write them in, like, a morning.
They take about as long to read as they took to write. Because he was... you know, the fastest typer at the Pendulum Press offices. He would just bang them out. He was more prolific than anybody. Some of the books I kind of like Killer and Drag and Death of a Transvestite. The
Hollywood or Bust?
or Hollywood Rat Race.
That's right.
Never published during his lifetime, but I love that book. That was his Hollywood how-to manual / memoir. He also apparently wrote a book about Bela Lugosi that belongs in the hands of private collectors. I think Bela Jr. maybe has a copy.
Oh, he's never going to let that go in his lifetime.
It's like, let's pool our resources. What do you think it would take to get that out of him?
Okay, finally. Whoa, breaking news. You were doing research before you started, just checking a few things, and you just learned something you didn't know before.
This is huge. So for many years, Ed has been mentioned in connection to a movie called Meat Cleaver Massacre.
And you're like, he didn't work on that.
Because Christopher Lee stars in it. I mean, look, this is a pretty bottom rung movie, but Ed Wood was working way below the bottom of that rung, you know, when this came out. But Meat Cleaver Massacre, you know, it's attributed to, you know, somebody or other. It's given an Alan Smithy kind of pseudonym, and that's because the original director was dismissed at some point during production. Now, for years, the name Ed Wood has been attributed to this movie because people thought he was an extra in the film. Man in Crowd, played by Ed Wood. And people have looked at the movie and seen the Man in Crowd and said, maybe.
Yeah, that could be Ed Wood, I think.
It could be if you squint.
Yeah.
Recently, Andrew Rausch, the author, published a book where he interviewed the cinematographer of this movie and the editor of this movie. And they say Ed Wood really was the replacement director of Meat Cleaver Massacre. So a year before he died, his career dead, I haven't seen Meat Cleaver Massacre.
How did he get hired? Like, Ed is basically soused 100% of the time at this point.
I don't know, but those are two people involved in the production. Two high-level people who say Ed Wood ghost directed at least part of that film. So there you have it, a new addition to the canon.
There's always things to be discovered. Who knows? It could be a completely like unknown film that just pops out of nowhere. Are there like Ed Wood things that like you've whispered but haven't popped up? Because you keep talking about like lost things getting rediscovered.
I mean, at this point, I don't know.
Like a skeleton, I guess, like, that some collector has.
There are some short films from the 50s that haven't been found. There was one that's called The Night the Banshee Cried, I believe.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
Which was kind of like Final Curtain, another TV pilot type thing. There was another one called Boots, which is a sequel to Crossroads Avenger, which was his Western TV pilot. A few little projects like that just have not come to light. Mm-hmm. But in the last 15 years, lots of things have come to light.
Yeah.
Like
Take It Out and Trade.
The Sun Was Setting, another sort of TV episode, Final Curtain, obviously. So you never know. There always seem to be discoveries.
And I think the only people who can do that is you.